In the waning twilight of time, when the sun of justice seemed hidden behind the clouds of tyranny, and the hearts of the faithful cried out in longing for divine guidance, the earth sat in quiet anticipation. The winds whispered secrets across deserts and valleys, carrying with them the old prophecies. The stars, though distant, watched with a knowing silence, and the believers, scattered, struggling, and oppressed, raised their hands toward the heavens, calling upon their Lord for a Savior foretold in the earliest pages of divine revelation. The world was no longer what it once had been. Morality had faded like ink on parchment left too long in the sun. Corruption dressed itself in power, and oppression walked unchallenged through lands once known for justice. From the east to the west, cries of the innocent were stifled by the noise of war and the clamor of greed. The earth groaned under the weight of injustice. And yet, amidst this suffocating darkness, there remained a flicker, faint, unwavering, alive. It was in this setting that the prophecy of the Mahdi found new breath. For centuries, his name had been whispered in circles of knowledge and carved into the hearts of the pious. Al-Mahdi, the guided one, descendant of the noble prophet Muhammad, the awaited leader whose hands would restore balance to a broken world. He would not be a mere ruler of lands or a bearer of arms alone. He would be a light, divinely guided, a mercy to the earth in its final hours. His lineage was pure, traced directly back to the Prophet through the blessed line of Fatima az-Zahra and Imam Hussein, R.A. And though his name was familiar, Muhammad ibn Abdullah, his mission would be one the world had not witnessed since the times of prophets. A mission to uproot tyranny, establish divine justice, and awaken sleeping hearts to the remembrance of their Creator. But where was he? Many believed he had already been born, hidden from the eyes of the world by the will of Allah, as prophets before him had been protected. Just as Musa as had been placed in the river and Isa as lifted to the heavens, so too was the Mahdi believed to live in concealment, waiting for the divine command to arise. Others awaited his birth, believing that the signs foretold by the prophet were still unfolding. Regardless of the opinion, one truth bound the believers: he would come. And when he did, the earth would tremble, not in fear, but in relief. The narrations were many. The messenger of Allah had foretold, even if there remains but one day in the life of this world, Allah will prolong it until he sends a man from my progeny whose name is like mine and whose father's name is like my father's. He will fill the earth with justice and equity as it was filled with oppression and tyranny. Soon in Abi Dawood, in the depths of the night, in homes both humble and grand, believers whispered his name in their due. Mothers wept for a better future for their children. Scholars pointed to the signs: the wars in Sham, the chaos in Arabia, the rise of false leaders, the global collapse of truth. Hearts trembled in hope, while others feared the nearing hour of reckoning. And still, his presence loomed unseen, like the moon hidden behind clouds, waiting for its appointed moment to rise. In the holy city of Medina, where the prophet rests beneath the green dome, the air carried a certain heaviness. The minarets stood tall, piercing the sky with their silent supplication. Beneath the arches of Masjid an-Nabawi, an old scholar recited from memory the narrations of the Mahdi, his voice quivering not from age, but from awe. Children played outside, unaware of the storm that history was preparing. Far in the east, in cities plagued by tyranny, a young believer clutched a worn copy of the Quran. His eyes closed, his lips moving in silent prayer, not for victory, but for guidance. He had lost his family, his home, everything but faith. And in that moment of emptiness, he found a name echoing in his soul: Al-Mahdi. And in the unseen realms, the angels moved with purpose. The trumpet of Israfil stood ready, though silent. The pen that records history paused, as if waiting to write a new chapter. And in the heavens, the throne of Allah was untouched by the chaos of earth. Yet from it, divine mercy was already descending. The world did not know when the Mahdi would emerge, but creation was preparing. The signs were no longer distant. They were here, like shadows at dusk, lengthening with every passing moment. And he was near, not as a conqueror seeking spoils, but as a servant of Allah sent to fulfill a promise. His heart beat in sync with the suffering of the Ummah. His hands were raised in dew before the unseen battle. And though hidden, his soul carried the weight of centuries of longing, the prayers of generations, and the destiny of nations. This is the story of his return, not just as a man, but as a manifestation of divine justice, mercy, and truth. A story not bound by myth or fantasy, but foretold by the one who never spoke from desire, the beloved prophet. So let the hearts open, let the souls listen. For in the darkest hour, the light will rise, not from the east or the west, but from the decree of Allah through the return of the Mahdi. He was not born in celebration. No banners hung in the skies, nor drums beat in the streets. His arrival was known only to a select few, those whose hearts were aligned with the divine rhythm of destiny. It was as if the earth itself had kept his birth a secret, swaddled in silence, to protect the one who would one day shake the world with truth. From the earliest moments of his life, it was clear this child was no ordinary soul. His mother, descended from the noble bloodline of Fatima Zahra, bore the weight of prophecy within her womb. She wept during the nights, not from fear, but from the immense awe of what had been entrusted to her. And his father, a man of hidden knowledge and piercing insight, watched the boy grow with quiet reverence, knowing that his son's fate would unfold on a path unlike any walked before. He was named Muhammad ibn Abdullah after the best of creation, the seal of prophets. The weight of that name would rest on his shoulders, not as a burden but as a mantle of divine inheritance. In his eyes burned the depth of generations past, pain and hope, fury and compassion, the quiet strength of a little babe. Even in his childhood, the signs were present. He did not cry like other infants, nor did he demand like others of his age. His silence was profound, like the deep hush before a storm. His eyes followed the movements of the sky as if he understood the language of stars. Often he would sit in stillness, watching the moon rise and the sun retreat behind the dunes, his small hands folded in wonder, his heart already drawn to the one beyond all veils. He was not raised in palaces nor given worldly comforts. Allah, in his divine wisdom, shaped his soul through hardship. Like Musa in the courts of Pharaoh and Yusuf in the darkness of a well, the Mahdi was groomed in silence, away from the spotlight, away from the noise of the world. Every trial that befell him, every scar upon his soul, was preparing him for a day when he would carry the grief of an entire Ummah. His teachers were not many, but those who did guide him noticed something divine in his demeanor. He listened more than he spoke. And when he did speak, his words were measured, calm, yet full of certainty. He asked not of wealth, nor power, nor praise. His questions were about justice, about mercy, about why the world remained silent in the face of suffering, about when the voice of truth would rise again. The elders in his community spoke of him in hushed tones. There is something about the boy, they would whisper. His gaze is heavy as if he sees beyond this world. A heart too old for his age. A soul touched by light. And indeed, he had been touched by dreams not born of the mind, but sent from above. From his earliest youth, the Mahdi was visited by visions in the night. He would see the Kaaba glowing with unbearable light. He would hear the cries of oppressed nations as if they were his own. And in his dreams, a man radiant with nur, cloaked in white, with a face brighter than the full moon, would speak to him with words that pierced his soul. The time will come, O son of my blood. Be firm, for the earth awaits you. He knew it was the messenger of Allah. These dreams left him shaken but not afraid. He awoke from them with a resolve burning stronger than before. He did not run from the weight of his destiny. Instead, he began to shape himself for it. He memorized the Quran with a heart that wept over every verse. He lingered on the verses of Adl, justice, and Rama, mercy, feeling each word pulse through his veins. He studied the lives of the prophets not as stories, but as roadmaps. He wept when reading of the crucifixion plot against Isa, the abandonment of Yusuf, the pain of Ayub, For each pain mirrored a portion of his own future. He trained in body and spirit alike, not in luxurious academies or halls of gold, but in the harshness of the real world. He walked long distances through desert and ruin, observing how the poor lived, how the strong preyed on the weak. He ate little, fasted often, and prayed with the sincerity of one who had nothing but Allah. People saw him often in the last row of the masjid, head bowed low, weeping as the imam recited the verses of divine wrath and divine mercy. They saw him feeding the hungry, mending the sandals of the destitute, wiping the tears of orphans. Yet they did not know who he was. He never told them. His mission was not to be known, it was to prepare. At times, he would sit atop a hill overlooking a city drowned in injustice, whispering to the wind, Ya Allah, I see them. I see the tyrants and the deceivers. I see the orphans and the widows. I am not ready yet, but you are preparing me. Grant me the strength to carry what awaits. Those moments shaped him. Each wound carved into his soul became a reservoir of compassion. Each injustice he witnessed became fuel for his fire. The Ummah had lost its compass, and he would one day be its direction, not with arrogance, but with divine guidance. For he knew he was not to bring a new religion. He was to revive what had been lost. And yet there was loneliness. A loneliness that no companionship could ease. For he walked a path few understood. The weight of being chosen is a weight often carried alone. He would walk through the market and feel the eyes of angels upon him. He would pray in solitude and hear his name whispered in the heavens. But to the people, he was a stranger. Just another man. He understood now why the prophet had said, Islam began as something strange and it will return to being strange, so give glad tidings to the strangers. He was one of those strangers. And yet he did not despair. He found comfort in the silence, peace in the hardship, and meaning in the waiting. For the Mahdi was not a man rushing toward destiny. He was a man walking with it, letting it unfold as Allah decreed. And as he grew, so did the restlessness of the world. Kings fell. Regimes collapsed. False leaders rose and confused the masses. The scholars warned, the signs intensified, and the world stood on the edge of something it could not name. But the Mahdi remained hidden. Not lost. Not absent. Hidden like a seed beneath the soil before spring, like the moon before it emerges in full. The world would see him soon. But for now, Allah was still shaping his soul. Still molding the one who would rise when hope seemed all but lost. There are moments in a man's life when the veil between heaven and earth feels thin, so thin that even the whisper of an angel's wing can be felt across the soul. For the Mahdi, such moments came not with spectacle, but with subtle power. The signs were not to dazzle, but to awaken, to draw him ever closer to the divine source that had chosen him long before his birth. One such moment occurred on a night darker than any he had known. The world around him slept in heedlessness, yet his heart was restless. He walked alone through the outskirts of a desolate town, a crescent moon barely hanging in the sky. The air was thick with silence, and the stars above flickered as if holding their breath. He stopped to pray. As he bowed in sujud, the ground beneath him trembled, not violently, but enough for the pebbles around him to rattle. He did not rise. Instead, he whispered a prayer only the angels could hear. Ya Allah, if this is your sign, I accept it. If this is your way of calling me, I am listening. The trembling stopped. And in that moment of stillness, he felt it, an overwhelming sense of presence. Not of man, not of jinn, but of the unseen command of Allah descending upon the earth. A voice, not heard with the ears but known deep in the heart, echoed, "You are not alone." From that night onward, the world began responding to him differently. Animals that had once run from humans now paused in stillness as he passed. Children, with their hearts pure and untainted, would gaze at him as though they recognized something ancient within him. The blind woman on the edge of the market, who never spoke to anyone, reached out one day as he walked by and whispered, "The one foretold. I saw you in a dream when I was still young." He said nothing, but his soul shuddered. Soon after, he began to witness dreams that were not his own. Visions came to him in the night, scenes of lands he had never visited, faces of people he had never met, speaking in languages he did not know, and yet he understood them. They wept. They cried out for justice. They raised their hands and whispered his name, Al-Mahdi, without knowing why. The dreams were not random. They were a map, a calling. Each vision aligned like stars, forming a constellation pointing him toward his destiny. And with the visions came tests, unseen trials meant to purify and elevate. Once, while journeying alone through a barren region, he encountered a man dying of thirst. The man's lips were cracked and his skin burned beneath the merciless sun. Without hesitation, the Mahdi gave him all the water he had, knowing he would have none left for himself. When the man drank and revived, he looked at the Mahdi and wept, not out of gratitude, but out of reverence. "You don't know what you are," the man whispered. "Or perhaps you do, and you were just waiting like the rest of us." That night, as the Mahdi lay weak from thirst beneath a lone acacia tree, a miracle unfolded. A light rain began to fall, not across the land, but only upon him. Cool droplets from the mercy of Allah quenched his thirst, and he wept, not from pain, but from awe. It was in solitude that the Mahdi grew closest to his Lord. The more the world pulled away, the more heaven opened to him. Another time, while deep in prayer in a secluded cave, he heard the sound of footsteps behind him. Yet, when he turned, there was no one. Instead, carved freshly into the wall was a verse from the Quran, and say, "Truth has come and falsehood has vanished." Surely, falsehood is ever bound to vanish. Surah Al-Isra 17 hours 81 minutes. He placed his hand upon the verse, and it was warm as if the stone had been touched by something not of this world. But not all signs were peaceful. There were nights of torment too, nights where he felt the crushing weight of the Ummah's suffering. He would wake, drenched in sweat, having dreamed of burning cities, of innocents slaughtered, of scholars silenced, of Qurans trampled beneath boots of tyranny. These were not dreams. They were glimpses, and each one left a scar on his soul. In one vision, he stood at the Kaaba, watching as a great army surrounded it. The skies above were dark, the birds fled, and a voice cried out, "Only the one with divine protection will stand on this day." He fell to his knees in the dream, only to rise and see himself encircled by a band of men, righteous, unshaken, with light in their eyes and swords not drawn for conquest, but for defense of truth. He recognized them. He did not know their names, but their hearts were bound to his. He would find them, or they would find him. And so began the spiritual gathering, those chosen few who, across the globe, began to receive their own signs. In Turkey, a soldier left his post and journeyed eastward, claiming he had been called in a dream by a man with light in his chest. In Indonesia, a young scholar abandoned a promising career to dedicate himself to the study of end-time prophecies. In Nigeria, a merchant gave away all his wealth and began a path of service, convinced that the Mahdi's time was near. These men and women were unseen threads in the divine tapestry, moving toward a destiny they could not explain. Back in his hidden place of residence, whose location none truly knew, the Mahdi continued his life in secrecy but not in idleness. He studied the global chaos. He wept for Gaza, for Kashmir, for Syria, for the Uyghurs, for the Rohingya, for every heart that broke beneath the weight of injustice. He kept a record, not of names and numbers, but of du'as offered, of tyrants unchecked, of voices unheard. One evening, he stood before the Quran, opened it to a random page, and found his answer. "Indeed, we will support our messengers and those who believe during the life of this world and on the day when the witnesses will stand." Surah Ghafir 40:51. He smiled, not because the end was near, but because he knew that the truth always belonged to Allah and Allah never breaks his promise. Miracles began to follow him, not in the way of spectacle, but in the quiet, unmistakable language of divine will. When he passed through a village decimated by famine, rain would follow days later. When he visited a town plagued by war, ceasefires came unexpectedly. When he prayed in a masjid long abandoned, hearts returned to it by the hundreds in the following weeks. He said nothing. He sought no recognition. But the people began to whisper, "There's something about him. His face, it's like someone we've heard of in the Hadith. He walks like he's being followed, not by men, but by angels." But the Mahdi never confirmed anything. He knew the time had not come. And yet, deep inside, he felt it drawing closer. Like the sound of distant thunder rolling in across the mountains. Like the winds shifting before a storm. His heart raced more often now. He fasted more frequently. His night prayers lengthened. He readied himself not for glory but for burden. For when he would rise, it would not be to claim power but to fulfill a sacred trust. And then came the dream that changed everything. He stood on the plains of Arafat, surrounded by a sea of believers, all in white. Above him, the sky split with light, not harsh, but radiant. The prophet stood before him, eyes full of mercy and power. Beside him stood Isa ibn Maryam as, his face calm, eyes like the sea. The prophet raised his hand and pointed to the Mahdi. "The time is near. The world is ready. You will not walk alone." When he awoke, his body trembled. Tears flowed from his eyes like rivers. And on his tongue was a single phrase, "Ya Allah. I am yours. I am ready." The spiritual path was now complete. The miracles had been seen. The heart had been cleansed. And the command he knew was drawing near. Great souls are not forged in comfort, they are tempered in the furnace of divine trial. For the Mahdi, who had walked through the valleys of isolation and climbed the peaks of spiritual elevation, the time had come for a different kind of preparation. Not the purification of heart or the deepening of wisdom, but the crushing, soul-defining test of absolute surrender. It began not with swords or armies, but with a silence more deafening than war, the silence of waiting while the world burned. His heart, already torn by the cries of the oppressed, was tested by the feeling of powerlessness. In every direction he looked, injustice ruled. Tyrants mocked God's laws from their gilded thrones. Innocent children starved. Mosques were desecrated. Scholars were imprisoned or silenced. The world begged for leadership, for divine justice, yet he was commanded to remain hidden. To wait. And waiting for one chosen is a test greater than battle. Every part of his soul screamed to act, to rise, to speak, but divine wisdom held him still. And so he wept, not in weakness, but in submission. Ya Allah, he would whisper in the dark, you are the all-knowing. You are the all-wise. My hand trembles with longing to lift the sword of justice, but my feet will not move without your command. There were nights when the temptation to reveal himself burned like fire in his chest. When he saw women violated and homes turned to rubble, when the cries of orphans echoed through his sleep, he would rise, ready to abandon his concealment, to call upon the righteous and make his stand. But always a sign would come. A voice in his heart, gentle but firm, not yet. And so he waited. But the trial was not in patience alone, it came also in betrayal. One of the men closest to him, a companion who had journeyed with him, prayed beside him, wept with him, was taken by doubt. The test of waiting had shaken the faith of many, and this companion was among those who began to question, if you are the Mahdi, why are you still hidden? If Allah has chosen you, why do you remain silent while evil prevails? Why don't you rise now when the world is ready to follow you? The Mahdi listened in silence. He did not defend himself. He did not argue. He simply looked at his companion with eyes heavy with sorrow. If I act by my desire, he said quietly, I will fail. If I act by Allah's command, I cannot be defeated. Would you have me rise for myself, or for the sake of the one who sent me? But the companion turned away, and others began to follow. His circle grew smaller. His isolation deepened. The path of the chosen one was becoming more desolate than ever. He was tested with poverty, with illness, with deep, soul-wrenching loneliness. The love he had for his Ummah became a source of constant pain because he could not yet act to help them. His du'as became his only weapon. His nights were soaked in tears. His fasts extended beyond obligation, as if starving the body could quiet the fire in his heart. He remembered the words of the Prophet, the Mahdi will be tested greatly before he is given the flag. And so he bore the test. One day, while in deep prayer, his body weakened from fasting and his face pale from sleepless nights, he fell into a prostration that lasted for hours. When he finally raised his head, he saw nothing but white light before his eyes. His body trembled. And from that light, he heard a voice, not of a man, but of an angel, O Mahdi, your Lord has seen your patience. Your test is known. And soon, your time will come. But even now, another trial awaits. That trial was one he had long feared, the call of falsehood. Word began to spread across the Ummah of other claimants. Men who rose in distant lands, claiming to be the Mahdi, gathering armies, speaking of prophecy. Some had charisma, others had wealth. Many had the ears of the desperate and the backing of secret powers. The world, broken and bleeding, was ready to follow anyone who promised victory. And for a moment, the hearts of the people leaned toward impostors. The Mahdi remained silent. The false Mahdis rose and fell, some in disgrace, others in defeat. But with each one, confusion spread like wildfire. The people grew jaded. Their faith in prophecy was shaken. There is no Mahdi, some began to say. It was all a story from the past. This too was part of the divine test. But the true Mahdi did not falter. He had not come for followers. He had not come for fame. He had come for Allah, and he knew that Allah's plan unfolded with absolute precision. Then came the greatest test of all, the temptation of power before the time was right. A group of noble warriors, believers from different lands who had seen the signs and recognized his truth, came to him in secret. They offered their loyalty, their lives, their swords. You are the one, they said. Let us rise now. The people are ready. The tyrants are weak. You can begin the march. He looked at them, love and sorrow in his eyes. You are sincere, he said, but sincerity must be paired with divine timing. Victory is not granted by numbers. It is granted by the permission of Allah. If I move before he commands, even with 1,000 armies, I will be destroyed. But if I move by his will, even with 12 companions, the world will bend before his truth. Some wept and stayed with him. Others, disillusioned, left in silence. The Mahdi turned back to his night prayers, more determined than ever to pass this final test. And then, one night, the heavens trembled. It was unlike any night before. A storm unlike any seen in decades thundered across the Arabian skies. The moon turned red. A voice, not earthly, was heard by many believers in their dreams. The Mahdi has been purified by his trials. The time is near. Be ready. In that moment, far from the gaze of any crowd, the Mahdi stood, alone in prayer. His head bowed, his hands raised. He whispered, Ya Allah. You tested me with longing. You tested me with delay. You tested me with silence, betrayal, and temptation. I have nothing left of myself. I am only yours. The trials had not broken him. They had emptied him of self, of pride, of ego. What remained was only servitude, only surrender. And from this state of complete submission, the next chapter would begin. The night was unlike any other. It was neither marked by celestial signs nor the beating of war drums, but the stillness of that moment, so pure, so absolute, felt as though the universe itself had paused in breathless awe. The stars shone more brightly. The wind moved with a sacred hush. And somewhere between heaven and earth, the time had come. The Mahdi stood alone in the darkness of Tahajjud, wrapped in the light of solitude. His forehead pressed to the ground in sujud, his soul stripped of all ambition except to serve the will of the Most High. Years of trials had passed, and he was no longer the same man who once wept under the acacia tree, pleading for guidance. Now he was ready, not by his own merit, but by the molding hand of divine decree. Then it came. A dream, no more than a dream. A vision wrapped in truth. He stood once again at the plains of Arafat. This time, the crowds around him were not silent. They chanted his name in one voice, not in arrogance or idolatry, but in desperation and hope. A man stood before him, noble, radiant, wrapped in white garments. It was the Prophet Muhammad. Behind him stood Isa ibn Maryam as, his hands folded in reverence. The Prophet stepped forward and placed his blessed hand on the Mahdi's shoulder. "Rise, O son of mine. The time has come. You will not walk alone. The angels will surround you and the truth will rise with your banner." He woke with tears in his eyes, trembling. Outside, the early light of dawn had not yet broken, but something had changed in the air. He felt it, the shift. The permission had come. And that very day, the world began to move. In Makkah, during the season of Hajj, the city overflowed with believers from every nation. Among them were scholars, warriors, oppressed refugees, and seekers of truth. The tension was thick. Political powers had fractured. Rumors of a divinely guided man among them began to circulate. A quiet unrest brewed, one that was not born of rebellion but of yearning. Then, in the sacred precincts of the Haram, something no one could have anticipated occurred. A group of righteous men, known for their piety and knowledge, publicly declared their oath of allegiance to the Mahdi. Not as a ruler of the world, but as the awaited servant of Allah who would restore the balance of justice. They stood before the Kaaba, their hands trembling, and one by one, they pledged, "We recognize you as the Mahdi foretold by our prophet. We pledge to stand by you, not for power, but for truth. Let us and we will follow even unto death." Word spread like wildfire. Crowds gathered, not in violence, but in tears. Men and women wept as they heard his name, as they witnessed the face they had seen in dreams. Many collapsed in prostration. Some fainted in awe. And the Mahdi, quiet, composed, and luminous with humility, did not raise his hands in triumph. He raised them only in dua with Makran. "Ya Allah, you have brought me to this moment. Do not let me falter now." And then the miracles began. As the Mahdi stood before the Kaaba, delivering not a political speech, but a khutbah of pure devotion and Quranic truth, the skies above Makkah shifted. A great light appeared like a column from the heavens, descending softly upon the Haram. Witnesses testified to hearing a divine stillness fall over the crowd. Even the birds in the sky hovered, unmoving. The very earth beneath them felt softened. Rain began to fall gently, though no clouds had gathered. It was not a storm, but a mercy. The people stood in silence, soaked in this heavenly water, their hearts breaking in gratitude. Old men wept like children. Children held their mothers, whispering, "He is come." The one they spoke of, "He is here." Then, during the second night after the allegiance, a voice was heard across the skies. Not by microphone, not by speaker, but by the hearts of the faithful. "This is the Mahdi, the guided one. Follow him. And do not fear, for the promise of Allah is true." This voice, so powerful, so pure, was heard in every tongue. Arabs heard it in Arabic. Persians heard it in Farsi. Africans, Asians, Europeans all heard it in their own language. Even those who had never believed stood frozen, their souls awakened by something far greater than themselves. The Mahdi wept that night. He returned to the Kaaba under the cover of stars, knelt in sujud, and sobbed, "Ya Allah, you have fulfilled your promise. But I ask you for one thing, let me remain humble. Let me serve, not rule. Let me carry this trust without pride, without ego, without sin." And it was in that supplication that another miracle unfolded. As he prayed, the stones of the Haram began to shimmer, not in the eyes of all, but in the eyes of those chosen to see. They saw light ripple outward from where he knelt, light that moved like water, flowing into the hearts of those who stood behind him. In that moment, thousands were renewed in faith. Doubts disappeared, hatred melted, unity blossomed. Across the world, those attuned to the signs felt the shift. A child in Yemen woke in the night, saying, Mama, the man with light in his chest has come. A prisoner in Palestine, who had prayed for justice for years, felt peace flood his heart for the first time in decades. A scholar in Egypt, studying the Hadith of the Mahdi, suddenly saw pages in his book turn without wind and land on the page that said, "When you see him, pledge to him, even if you must crawl over ice." The time had truly come. Within days, delegations arrived from every corner of the Muslim world. Not political delegations, but gatherings of scholars, pious elders, and humble believers. They came to pledge not their allegiance to a man, but to the truth he carried. And then came Isa ibn Maryam, as. In one of the most extraordinary moments in history, the Mahdi stood before the Ummah, surrounded by his loyal companions and the masses of believers. When the sky broke with a light unlike any before, Isa descended, gentle, noble, luminous, and stood behind the Mahdi as he led the prayer. It was a moment of ultimate submission. The Prophet of Allah, Isa ibn Maryam, as, humbled himself before the Mahdi, not out of inferiority, but to fulfill the divine order. The Mahdi, knowing the weight of this moment, felt his knees tremble. He turned to Isa and said, "O Ruhullah, you are more deserving to lead." But Isa replied, "The Ikama was made for you. You are the leader of this Ummah now." The prayer began, and in that prayer the world changed. Across the lands, tyrants felt their hearts constrict. Secret plots unraveled. Walls built on oppression began to crack. And in the unseen world, the devils who once whispered freely now fled. The Mahdi's submission had called forth not just miracles, but a cleansing of the earth itself. He was no longer hidden. The time of concealment had ended. The banner of truth had been raised, not with arrogance, not with war, but with submission, obedience, and divine mercy. This was not the rise of a king. This was the return of justice, the return of mercy, the return of the trust that began with Muhammad and now rested, by Allah's will, with the Mahdi. The world, once steeped in chaos, now witnessed a dawn that had long been prophesied. But this was not the dawn of empire or worldly dominion. It was the return of divine order. The Mahdi, now revealed, stood not above the people but among them. His presence was not of majesty in gold and silk, but in humility, in justice, and in a truth that made tyrants tremble. He did not build palaces. He did not seek titles. He restored what had been lost: sincerity in leadership, integrity in law, and compassion in judgment. His justice was swift, not by sword, but by sincerity. The oppressed no longer whispered their grief into the void. They spoke it openly before a leader who wept with them, whose heart broke alongside theirs. He led not with fear, but with awe for Allah. In every corner of the earth, the impact was felt. Prayers once offered with weary doubt were now whispered with hope. Families gathered again in masajid once empty. The Quran was no longer a book on a shelf, but the living constitution of a renewed Ummah. And perhaps most importantly, unity was reborn. Sectarian lines blurred beneath the banner of the Mahdi. Sunni and Shia, Arab and non-Arab, rich and poor, none were given superiority save by taqwa. His presence shattered the idols of nationalism and partisanship. He reminded the Ummah, "We are one body. When one part aches, the whole suffers." His greatest companion and supporter was Isa ibn Maryam, as, who stood beside him not as a ruler, but as a witness. Together, they did not establish a new religion. They revived the original light of Islam, buried beneath centuries of division and distortion. Under their leadership, usury was abolished. Justice replaced bribery. The hungry were fed not by charity, but by responsibility. Orphans were raised as honored children of the Ummah. The Quran echoed again in marketplaces, homes, and hearts. One day, a child asked the Mahdi, "Are you the king now?" He smiled, knelt down, and replied, "No, my son, the only king is Allah. I am only his servant." His legacy was not in statues or monuments. It was in reformed hearts, in schools that taught the love of the Prophet, in courtrooms where even the guilty were treated with dignity, in streets where women walked safely, and in homes where the night echoed with Quran. His leadership was not eternal. He knew, like all appointed servants of Allah, his time too would come to an end. But he was not afraid. He had fulfilled his duty, not for fame, not for remembrance, but for Allah alone. In his final khutbah before the Ummah, his voice trembled not with weakness, but with love. O people, do not remember me as one who brought victory. Remember the one who gives victory. Do not place your trust in men, no matter how sincere. Place your trust in Allah who never dies. The time will come when I leave you, but do not despair. For Allah is with the righteous, always. And so the Mahdi's days came to a close. He left behind no crown, no fortune, no heir. What he left was far greater. A living Ummah, renewed in faith, bound in brotherhood, and wrapped in the mercy of Allah. To this day, his legacy lives on. In every prayer whispered with sincerity, in every act of justice done without fame, in every soul that returns to Allah, inspired by his story. He was not the end. He was the bridge between the broken past and the radiant future promised in the words of Rasulullah. And so, the story of the Mahdi is not merely a tale from the pages of Hadith. It is a mirror for our time, a reminder that even in the darkest hours, Allah does not abandon his servants, that justice is not dead, that truth is not lost, and that divine help is nearer than we think. The Mahdi did not rise to be worshipped. He did not lead for glory. He stood only as a servant of Allah, a reminder that victory comes through patience, that power is only rightful when used for righteousness, and that the true change of the world begins with the change of the heart. He taught us that leadership is not about dominance, but responsibility. That love for the Ummah is not in slogans, but in sleepless nights, in feeding the hungry, in standing for the voiceless, in guiding the misguided. His legacy calls out to each of us, not just to await the Mahdi, but to prepare for him. Prepare our hearts, purify our homes, return to the Quran, uphold the Sunnah, revive sincerity in worship, and mercy in dealings. The Mahdi's mission was never about one man. It was about the reawakening of the Ummah, the reclaiming of the soul of Islam. Let us not be among those who watched history unfold, but remained asleep. Let us be among those who recognized the signs, who purified their hearts, and who stood with truth when it rose. And now, dear viewer, if this story touched your heart, if it stirred something deep within you, if it made you long for that age of justice, mercy, and divine light, then help us share it. Crescent Moon like this video to support stories that awaken the soul. Open Book subscribe to our channel Islam Voice for more stories of the prophets, the Aliyah, and the promised events to come. Speech Balloon leave a comment. What did this story awaken in you? How will you prepare your heart for the Mahdi? May Allah make us among the sincere, among the truthful, among those who recognize truth when they see it and rise for it. Ameen. Wa ma tawfiqi illa billah. My success is only by Allah.